All right, let's talk about what types of things people are buying, right? There's products and then there's services. Okay. When we think about adding ancillary revenue, you think of like ancillary services and you think of ancillary products. So an ancillary product, which we'll talk about would be something that's generally tangible or is easy for you to provide that you don't have to like physically go provide. Perfect example of that would be some sort of resident benefit package to the resident, right? And that's like a product that you sell your resident. A service is something different. So when I think about a service, I think about maybe our maintenance business is an ancillary service. Our brokerage business is an ancillary service. And so those are two different things, right? One is something like a product you're selling. One is something you're doing for a customer or a client. And then you also have to look at this through the lens of the resident, and you have to look at it through the lens of the owner. And so there's different things, like residents have different needs than owners have needs. So when I think about life through a resident, what are things that residents are buying that they just as soon buy from Evernest as buy from somewhere else? And we're going to talk about how we think about that and some things that we started offering our residents. And then when I think about an owner, how can I expand my relationship with my owners? I think about an owner coming in and they're owning rental property. There's like things they're buying, like mortgages and insurance, and they're already buying them, and they would just as soon buy them from Evernest. Spence, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I go back. When I think about this, I think back to the execution piece. To me, this really only works if you're executing and if you're providing a good service, because you're building that trust. And so to Matthew's point, they just want to, it's so much easier to have everything done with one service provider. And yeah, I just think that's obviously so very important to this whole thing.
Yeah, I'm glad you talked because I was coughing like crazy right there, and I didn't know how much longer I was going to be able to hold it on. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Everybody wants to, once you build trust with somebody, you want to buy more things from them. It just makes a lot of sense, and it's way easier to do that.
Even if it's more expensive, even if it's a little bit more expensive, but you know that the quality and you know that it's going to be done right, it's worth it.
Yes. Perfect example is I don't know that I've actually looked at prices on Amazon of certain things, right? If I'm buying a very expensive thing, obviously I'm looking at prices, but I'm not toothpaste. I really don't price shop. I just buy it because it's a convenience and I trust it.
Yep.
All right, let's talk a little bit about, and make sure you're getting your questions in here. We want to talk a little bit about it through the lens of a resident and some things, how we would think about ancillary revenue from a resident standpoint. The first one, which is a product I mentioned earlier, and perhaps the most easy thing because they make it so easy. And I know there's a lot of people that'll put these together themselves, but we're big fans of Second Nature, and we use their resident benefit package. It's just a great way to get started expanding your relationship with your residents. And this is something that our resident benefit package today includes things like pest share and air filters and a rewards program, and just a real easy product as step one if you want to think about expanding your relationship with your residents. The second thing I would think about is there is like a base case for how your resident relationship should be. And anytime a resident asks you to go outside of the normal processes of the kind of like property manager resident relationship, you certainly ought to ask them to pay you to do that. Because Robert Locke I grew up listening in this business, listening to him, and he always talked about how this was a nickel and dime business. And a lot of people say that in a negative way, but if you think about an organization like ours, you have to build it based on scale. And if you're doing a lot of extra things for your residents that they aren't paying for, then that's a big problem, because then that kind of like limits the amount of homes you can manage inside of your processes. So I threw up a couple of things that I would think about. We have all the time residents coming to us and saying, hey, I want to do a roommate swap. Oh, and that just takes like time. And so we have a fee for when somebody wants to do a roommate swap. So somebody from Evernest has to literally go through after underwriting the new residence application and create a new lease and do a whole bunch of things. And that's not something that we should have to do for a resident, and because it's outside of the scope of the services that we provide them. Sorry, I got a little sidetracked right there when the new question popped up. Another thing is renewals. We charge residents for renewals because there's obviously physical work that goes into that. And then notice posting. This is one that obviously landlord tenant law is state specific, but this is one, if I have to get you to pay your rent by posting a notice on your door, if that's what it takes to get you to pay your rent, that seems very silly to me. And I ought to charge you because I have to drive out there, or somebody has to drive out there and post a rent. And so that's another thing that we charge for. That's obviously a little bit more of a negative spin on that, but certainly want to make sure that you're charging for what you're doing.
Yeah. I was just thinking of pet fees. So we'll charge pet fees for logging that fee if they're going to have a pet. Obviously, the owner gets a vast majority of that pet fee, but we do retain a little bit of that for documentation and things like that.